Welcome into the Wire Rock Fantasy Football Podcast. We are on the NFL Week 4, episode 36. Well, used to be a quarter way through the season now. We have that extra week, so we're almost at a quarter. But getting into it, I'm your monotone master, and next to me is Bryan, our fantasy foreseer. Today we were out without Jon Rumney, the raging Rumney, due to some work issues that he's having. We've all had super busy weeks. Jon just couldn't make it for this episode. So we got some headlines to react to, and this one is just really funny to me, is that the Jets are so bad that they've been being beat by teams to a point where they look like they're a good defense or a tough defense for matchups, because teams get ahead by so much that the quarterback and wide receivers literally don't have to do anything for the rest of the game.
The Jets, I have a feeling that the Jets really aren't that bad, and it's just solely off the defenses that they played. I think Zach Wilson's just struggling as a rookie quarterback, as all the other rookie quarterbacks are. But I think they'll pull it together towards the end of the season. Corey Davis owners are still holding out for him to have that week 1 matchup that he did have. So I think it's really just the defenses that are pulling strong against the Jets right now. But I think their offense will come alive at some point. I have a good feeling.
Yeah, it's just they've lost a lot of pieces on their offensive line already. So just Zach Wilson has had no time to do anything in the pocket.
I mean, for defense pickup streamers, it's whoever plays the Jets, it's going to be like that all year. And I know that I'm targeting that's Jets, Jags. And that's really it. I mean, Jets and Jags, you have the defense against them, and they're going to be putting up at least over 8 points every week.
Yeah. We also had some record-setting games this week, Bryan. We saw Justin Tucker set the record for the longest and deepest hole in the hearts of Lions fans ever by getting a 66-yard doink field goal to set the NFL record. And we also saw the Bears set, I think, the second lowest in NFL history at yards per play at 1.1.
The Justin Tucker kick was actually nuts. And I think Justin Tucker is now by far the best kicker ever in NFL history. I mean, Adam Vinatieri is up
Justin
there.
Tucker just sealed it with that.
Yeah. Vinatieri has the resume. You could still make the argument for it, but pure kicker, athletic kicker, that's just insane. He's a GOAT.
And it's just kind of funny coming off the Bears game. Literally, the Matt Nagy's any of the quarterbacks could be the starter next week, and that's not what we want to hear. That's not what the Bear fans want to hear. They just want good news, and they're not going to get it.
So I was listening to part of my take from Barstool Sports, and they were saying that the Bears might have threw that game because they think that, Matt Nagy thinks that Andy Dalton's better than Justin Fields and trying to prove his point. So he purposely made bad play calls so Justin Fields would have a tough time. And then when Andy Dalton gets back, they're going to put him in next week and start him. It's just a conspiracy theory, but honestly, I wouldn't doubt it considering all the hype that they gave Andy Dalton before they signed him in the offseason.
I just feel like Adam Gase and Matt Nagy pretend to be the same person. If they were related or distant brothers with different names, I'd believe it.
I believe it 100%. But moving forward, it's on to my week 3 reaction headlines. The Chargers. The Chargers they're actually legit, and Mike Williams is the GOAT. I love that man. He's probably the best for where he was drafted in drafts in fantasy football. It's got to be the best receiver drafted out of all of them. I mean, Mike Williams has put up 18, and 30 in his first 3 weeks with 10 plus targets in every single game, a touchdown in every single game. I mean, he's came into the league and he never really either A, got hurt, or B, he just never really got the target share behind Keenan Allen. And it seems like Justin Herbert really loves him in the end zone. So I can see Mike Williams continuing to do this over the course of probably the entire season. So if you drafted him, props to you, because that Chargers offense is looking absolutely scary.
Well, it's because we've seen Mike Williams have 1,000-yard seasons. We've seen him have a season with 10 touchdowns. We just never saw both at the same time. And that's always just because Hunter Henry, there was another big red zone target there. Now Hunter Henry is gone. Jared Cook did not fill that role. So all of the red zone looks are really just going to Mike Williams, and it's paying off so far.
And even with Mike Williams balling out too, Keenan Allen's still balling out. Austin Eckler's still doing really well. So there's so much all the hype that was leading up to the season for the Chargers offense. It's finally coming to full circle because they all just look so good. So if you have Eckler, Keenan Allen, or Mike Williams, they're going to continue to ball out all season. Even Justin Herbert too, put up 30 points this week. I expect big things for the rest of the season with them. And on to my next point, the Chiefs are 1-2, which I think is pretty concerning to the rest of the league, while the Panthers, the Raiders, and the Broncos are 3-0. Do I think that's going to continue to happen? No shot. I mean, the Chiefs probably will come back and beat the Eagles like 15-0 this week, just solely because they've lost their last two. Their defense does look pretty bad, but with the signing of Josh Gordon, I do think that they'll probably turn around. I don't think Josh Gordon's going to have a huge effect on the team, but I'm sure we'll get into it later.
Yeah.
But there's no way the Chiefs lose 3 straight. And if they do lose 3 straight, then their dynasty is definitely going to be in question.
I just feel like they've basically been playing well. They've just been coming down to like the wire. I mean, it's just a handful of mistakes trying to do too much when they don't have to. I think Andy Reid and the Chiefs will most likely correct that going forward, so I'm not super concerned about them.
Yeah, I mean, they just got to limit the turnovers. That's all it is. Because I think Mahomes had like a no-look pass and it was like, oh my God, look at Mahomes' no-look pass. Went right through the receiver's hands. And then it turned the ball over in the red zone. It's just little things like that they're going to turn around. I mean, are they still a Super Bowl team? Yes. Will they probably still be in the Super Bowl? Probably. And then to my last point, the Rams beat the Bucs this week. And I think it's officially time to say that they are a Super Bowl winning team. That defense looks scary. Matt Stafford is an absolute beast. Cooper Kupp's the number one player or number one receiver in fantasy football. I expect the Rams probably to make a pretty big push for a Super Bowl this year if they can get by the Bucs, which they did last week.
Yeah, I think that it's basically just going to be a preview of a big playoff game, and it's really just going to come down to who has home field advantage, I think, because there's no way the Bucs don't figure it out and turn themselves around by the end of the year, too.
There's going to be a hype video after the Bucs win the Super Bowl, and it's going to be like, oh, they lost to the Rams like last year. They lost to the Saints twice in the regular season. What do they do in the playoffs? They absolutely kill the Saints. So it's going to be the same thing. I guarantee they're going to face again. They might lose to them, now, and then in the playoffs, they're just going to absolutely smoke them, and then they're going to go on to win another Super Bowl. It's how Tom Brady rolls. He's a go for a reason.
Oh, we'll talk about Tom Brady later, too. But getting into the Devil's Advocate team for week 3, because of Tua's injury, we subbed in Jimmy G as the next hated quarterback amongst all of us. Now, it's hard because sometimes their bench players might do better. So I kind of just have them added up all together by who is projected the most points. So out of this week, the lineup was Jimmy G, Mike Evans, Jonathan Taylor, Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, Dallas Goedert, and Miles Sanders in the flex. And this team came out to a win-loss of 91.6 points. So all 3 of us ended up beating this team this week. But if this team, let's say, had James Conner in the lineup, they would have had an additional 10 points, which would have made it a little bit closer. But it's just glad to see the 3 of us are beating the team made up of all the picks that we don't want this season.
Yeah, Jamar Chase is kind of scaring me with this team. He's like the one player that could absolutely crush us in one of these weeks. I think other than that, I mean, I'm not too high on all the other guys, but Jamar Chase has been looking real solid in the first 3 weeks.
It literally just came down to that 2 news articles that said he's having struggle. Like he just basically hit all preseason and was terrible, and then has come out since week 1 and looked like he's been an elite wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, and Tyler Boyd too. I think he did have a pretty good this up last week, but I don't think moving forward it's really just going to be T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And if Jamar Chase keeps catching touchdowns, I mean, there's no reason why he shouldn't win the Rookie of the Year.
Right. I'll most likely end up going to a quarterback, but so far all the quarterbacks don't look good. So Jamar Chase is making a pretty good case for himself.
Unless there's a drastic change in these QBs and Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, or even maybe Trey Lance comes into the starting role. Jamar Chase kind of has it locked up right now.
But let's get into some news. So you mentioned Josh Gordon. So he is now signed with the Chiefs. This would have been awesome if it was like 5 years ago, but Josh Gordon is pretty much, he's at the end of his career with this. Is like the millionth time he's been reinstated to the NFL. He's most likely just going to make the McCole Hardman, Demarcus Robinson pool even thinner. It's still just going to be Tyreek, Kelsey, and maybe Clyde with Mahomes leading this team.
Part of me wants to pick him up just solely for the reason around the hype, but at the same time, I feel like Josh Gordon's going to see maybe 7 snaps a game, and he's just going to be there for the presence, and then maybe come playoff times he gets a little bit more playing time here and there, catches a touchdown. Everyone's like, oh my God, the old Josh Gordon's back. But yeah. I mean, he's not the same person as he was a long time ago. So if it's me, I'm not wasting a lot of fab money on him this week, but I know there's going to be people in leagues who are going to try to expect the hype from him.
It's just okay, maybe he catches one deep pass for a touchdown and like, okay, so what? He's the next McCole Hardman on a team that already has McCole Hardman.
And who knows? Josh Gordon could be out of the league in 3 weeks. I mean, the last 3 times he's been reinstated, he's only played like 4 games. So, I mean, I'm not too high on it. Again, people will be high on them, and I understand why they are. But for me, I'm staying away from it.
Yeah. Moving on, like AJ Brown, after we saw him three rush yards, 2 targets, all he finished with it was 0.3 points this week. He's been a gigantic bust so far, I will say it, even though he is on one of my teams. Doesn't feel good being an AJ Brown manager, but the situation is like you can't do much about it because you know his talent, you know his potential and what he can do. If you can weather the storm, you can probably leave him on your bench for a week. But it's one of those situations where you're also just like the Christian McCaffrey manager, where it's like you have to hold them, but they're so low right now you can't really move on from them.
Yeah, I mean, people who drafted Julio Jones are probably very excited right now, and people who drafted Derrick Henry are even more excited because they're going to run the ball 40 times a game until AJ Brown's actually healthy.
And I mean, AJ Brown also kind of did this last year. He wasn't very useful for the first 4 games in the season because he was coming back from an injury, and then he exploded late like he did the previous year. So I'm not super concerned. It's just not great if your team really needs a win right now.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
Also, as I just mentioned, CMC avoids the IR, which means he might come back within 3 weeks. So the hype of Chuba Hubbard having a big season now, maybe it's like you're getting a 1 week or 2 week rental on him. But if you're the CMC owner, if he's out there free agency, you have to pick him up in case of the re-aggravation to CMC's injury later in the season.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how much fab is actually spent on Chuba Hubbard. I mean, I know I don't want to spend my entire budget on him solely because Christian McCaffrey could be back in 3 weeks. But there's a pretty good chance that he does get hurt again, like me trading for him last year, playing 1 game, getting 35 points, and getting hurt the very next game. So it very much could happen. Chuba Hubbard's definitely going to be probably one of the biggest ads behind Elijah Mitchell for the season so far.
I think like you're looking at if you're the Chuba, like if you're the CMC owner and he's out there, you're probably spending 30 to 40, maybe even more, if depending on how thin you are at running back and how concerned you're about the injury. If you need a running back and you are not the owner, but knowing that CMC is going to come back in a few weeks, you're probably spending between 10 and 20, really just trying to get 1 or 2 week win off your opponent.
Yeah, I can see it. I mean, if you need running backs desperately, go spend some money on them. But if you got running backs to hold, I mean, I wouldn't spend all your fab on it.
Moving on, James White out indefinitely with a really bad hip injury, had to get carted off. Now the biggest question is who fills his role of the pass catching bailout guy. And most likely, I want to believe it's JJ Taylor because he looked really good in preseason and in camp catching the football. He's also being used as a punt return specialist and a kick returner, so he definitely has the better hands. Ramondre Stevenson fits the more Damian Harris mold, so I don't think Ramondre will be going in for the pass catching work, especially since he showed that he can't hold on to the ball in week 1 with this early fumble. So it's basically if Ramondre Stevenson or JJ Taylor's out there, I would take the deep shot on JJ Taylor.
Yeah, I also saw that we actually brought in some people for a practice or a tryout, and one of those guys was Ito Smith. I think it was 5 running backs in total, but the only one that really caught my eye was Ito Smith. So I don't think those guys are gonna do anything. So I think like JJ Taylor will step up, Stevenson will step up, and then clearly Damian Harris is gonna run the rock probably 20 times a game. I mean, if the Pats keep playing like they do, I mean, we're gonna have to pass the ball way more often, so we don't even need a running back at this point.
Fair. Also, KJ Hamler is now out for the season with a torn ACL, which means the wide receiver room is really just down to Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick until Jerry Jeudy makes his return in week 6 or week 7.
Cortland Sutton let me down this week. I was really sad about that. And against a nice matchup against the Jets, it was game.
It's because he's playing the Jets. He didn't need to be in the game. Like that's the whole thing.
And Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams had like the best games of their career. Like Melvin Gordon was absolutely balling out. Javonte Williams balled out. Like it was just really just run it down their throats. Let's just win this game. I mean, Jets scored 0 points. I had the Denver Broncos defense. They had 19 without even scoring a touchdown. Like it was just a bloodbath the entire game.
It's like what it's going to come down to is when they play the Ravens now, it's going to be a much tougher matchup. They're going to have to rely on the passing game a little bit more. So I think Sutton sees a bounce back. Does he score 20 points again? Maybe not, but I think he gets into the teens.
Yeah, for sure.
And then this is a fun one. All Bears quarterbacks could be the starter for week 4, which is what we touched on earlier. It's just like, guys, what are you doing out there in Chicago? The ones who are really basically taking the big hit from this are Chicago Bears fans and Allen Robinson.
I think they'll probably end up going with Dalton next week. Like I mentioned before about the podcast and how they threw the game for Dalton. But then again, all these guys could start. Foles was a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Fields is a rookie. I mean, he's got a lot of talent. And Andy Dalton, I mean, there's not much great to say about him, but apparently the Bears love him. So they'll have a nice draft pick for next year because they can't figure it out right now.
And then Marlon Mack is actively seeking a trade, and the Colts have agreed to it. So they're trying to find a trade partner. He could easily just also mess up another running back committee already. Or would you consider Marlon Mack being a deep shot right now and just picking him up to see what team he might land on if you're in running back, so basically running back hell right now?
I think Marlon Mack's days of being a fantasy running back are probably over. I mean, if he goes to a team, I don't think he's a starting running back unless some team like really, really needs him. Like maybe the Panthers don't like Chuba Howard and they need another guy. They would just bring in Marlon Mack and then run him with a split carry between Chuba Hubbard and him. So I don't think it's worth picking him up for now. I mean, I'd just wait for the news and see where he goes. But even if he does go to somewhere that needs a running back, he's not going to play 20 snaps. He's not going to get 20 carries a game when he gets there.
Only bearing an injury, he's pretty much out there. Kind of just like how Payne Barber was this past week, where he's really only worth picking up if he's going to a team where the main guy just went down.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So let's get on to some flex pickups for this week. At wide receiver, it kind of depends on how many people are in your league because this guy might not be out there, but Henry Ruggs versus the Los Angeles Chargers Monday night. This could be a shootout kind of game. He saw 7 targets this week, saw 7 targets the week before. He's finally carving out a little bit of an role in this offense, but we'll see. I think if you're trying to find a good flex play this week, Henry Ruggs could be a good option. Another option which might be out there in deeper leagues is Emmanuel Sanders could be just floating around. It's not the Stephon Diggs show as it was last year. Emmanuel Sanders has taken that John Brown role, so he's still on the field. He's not going to be the focal point of the offense, but he could be out there for a handful of receptions and find the end zone if no one's guarding him.
You just never know about the Bills because one guy can go off one week and then Josh Allen has a terrible start the next week. I mean, Emmanuel Sanders is good. He's produced, when he was on the Saints, he produced on the Saints, but I think that both those targets are pretty good. I mean, they're pretty big focal points of the offense, but you never know. It's like you're probably never going to start these guys anyways, so I'm going to leave them on the waiver wire, but some people who are desperate for wide receivers probably can go pick those guys up. For my wide receiver, I chose Tim Patrick versus Baltimore. Again, the Broncos are down bad with their wide receivers right now, losing Jerry Jeudy, losing KJ Hamler. So now it's really down to Courtland Sutton, Noah Fant, and Tim Patrick. And I think Tim Patrick's had over 10 points in the last 2 weeks. So he's definitely up there and one of the best wide receiver pickups for this week. And if you're looking, again, if you're desperate for a wide receiver, I'd pick up Tim Patrick against Baltimore.
Moving on to some running backs. It's thin out there, but in some leagues, James Conner is still available, even though it's very much a split backfield between him and Chase Edmonds right now. If you're desperate, the Cardinals have shown that they will give James Conner carries, found the end zone last week, but going up against the Rams is not a good matchup for any running back. But if you're out there and you just really need a RB2 or a flex play, James Conner might unfortunately be the guy because of how thin it is on the waivers right now. Another guy who might be out there is Michael Carter. Now, it's not fun starting a Jets running back right now. None of them have been fantasy relevant, but Michael Carter has had the most productivity in the first few weeks. Had 9 points last week. He basically outperformed Ty Johnson this week. Tevin Coleman's still hurt. They're not playing a stingy defense in the Titans this week, so there's some dump-off passes. Maybe he falls into the end zone for a touchdown. You never know. But if you're very desperate for running back, Michael Carter could potentially be a play.
And my pick is probably the number one waiver wire ad this week. We already talked about him, is Chuba Hubbard against Dallas. The Panthers are looking pretty good. They're 3-0. DJ Moore is looking like that breakout season's coming out. Robbie Anderson still nowhere to be found because Sam Darnold's still afraid that he's reminding him of the Jets too much. So expect Chuba Howard to be a focal point in the offense. He's a good pass catcher too. He's fast, he's shifty. He'll be good for the weeks that CMC's out. So I wouldn't. He'll probably be the number one waiver wire ad this week. I'm going to assume so.
What about Royce Freeman? He did get some work. Do you think they probably go a 50-50 split, or do you think it will be all Chuba Howard in the weeks CMC's out?
I think it'll probably be like a 70-30 split between there. I mean, Royce Freeman's not the best, but Chuba Howard, he does look better out there. He's just faster, he's shiftier, he can catch the ball too. I'm not saying Royce Freeman's terrible, but I expect them to go with Hubbard for the duration that CMC's out.
Yeah, it's just like one of those things where it's just like if the rookie makes a mistake, then you just never know sort of situation. But Brian, hope you want to get some chunks. Grab a life vest because we're hopping into the stream for our streamers of the week. At quarterback, I'm going with Taylor Heineke versus Atlanta. Out of the 2 weeks that Heineke's been the starter, he has showed he has no fear. He is going to ball out no matter what, and he's playing a porous Atlanta defense this week. This could mean a ton of fantasy points. He showed that he also does run the ball. If you're looking for a streamer, Heineke could be the move this week.
Yeah, I said it last week, Taylor Heineke. You got to stop sleeping on him at some point because the man can ball out. With my pick, I chose Sammy D, the 3-0 former Jets quarterback. He's playing Dallas this week. I believe they are home. I'm actually not too sure on that. But either way, Sam Darnold's been looking really good with DJ Moore. The team overall is just looking a lot better. And Sam Darnold can run the ball too. Like he's been waiting to break out. The Jets really never let him hit his full potential. And now we're starting to see it. So I'd expect Sam Darnold to be added more and more as the weeks go on. As a backup QB or even a starter QB when some QBs go down. So I'd get him now before it's too late.
For a tight end, I've got Tyler Conklin versus Cleveland. The Vikings have been very pass heavy recently because their defense has been so bad that Tyler Conklin is slowly starting to carve out his own little role in this offense. Now, I'm not endorsing him being a full starter all season long, but he's had several targets in the past 2 weeks. He caught a touchdown. He could get you 5 for 15 this coming week versus Cleveland because they'll need to be passing because Cleveland's defense is going to be attacking Kirk Cousins. So he could be a sneaky streamer for this week.
Yeah, my pick is Dawson Knox for the Buffalo Bills against the Texans. Dawson Knox has always caught touchdowns for the Bills, but has never been consistent enough to be, a good tight end. But if Josh Allen can keep outscoring his opponents 72-14 like he has in the last 2 weeks, there's no reason why Dawson Knox shouldn't catch a touchdown, almost every other week. And considering how low the tight ends are this year, and there's only like 4 good ones. If you're looking for a tight end, you really need one, and you're praying for a touchdown. Dawson Knox definitely can catch one against the Houston Texans.
He's actually I think he's a tight end 6 on the year so far, which is pretty good for tight ends if you're streaming.
The only problem with him is that he splits snaps, but the bonus is that he's targeting the red zone like no other. Like he's a very good. I would say he's more of a touchdown dependent tight end, but it seems like they're using him a little bit more this season, which is giving me a little bit more hope to being like a tight end too.
Which honestly doesn't feel good putting your lost roster, but tight end that scores touchdowns is always good on a week-to-week basis.
Always.
Going for defensive streamers, my number one pick is the Titans right now because they're playing the Jets, but also the Titans play the Jaguars next week. So this is another opportunity for a defense you can pick up this week and then hold for 2 weeks, and then find another streamer the following week. Also, in some leagues, they might not be there. In our league, it is in a deep league. The Washington football team plays Atlanta. The Washington football team has not been elite as we all think that they have been. But this could be the game where they turn around and remind everyone that is a reason why there's all first-round draft picks on their defensive line.
Yeah, with my pick, I chose the Bengals against Jacksonville. Jacksonville did look good last week, which kind of concerns me for this Thursday night football game. James Robinson's looking a little bit better. Marvin Jones is staying consistent. DJ Chark staying consistent. But the Bengals have actually had 3 solid back-to-back good defensive outings, and they're not even owned by, I think, more than like 20%. So if you're looking for some guys for a defense other than the Titans, the football team, I know the Saints are up there this week too. If you want to add them, the Bengals are another good option for a juicy matchup in Week 4.
One of the things you got to think about is they just dismantled the Steelers. It's a short week for Jacksonville. It could be a good defensive matchup. Even though could Jacksonville put up a bunch of garbage points, that would be really bad for a defensive stat line, but it's a good chance they could walk away with several sacks and a pick or two from Trevor Lawrence.
Trevor Lawrence has thrown a pick in the first 3 weeks of football, so he's probably going to throw one on Thursday Night Football too. Just keep that in mind.
Do you think Trevor Lawrence is cursed? He never lost a regular season game, high school through college, and now do you think he's destined to lose every single regular season game of his NFL career?
He might. I just don't think Urban Meyers is a good coach. I think he should have stayed in college football and they should have hired someone else. I think Trevor Lawrence will be good down the road. I just think that his career might be wasted in Jacksonville. He'll get traded like a Sam Darnold situation and he'll blow up like 4 or 5 years from now. But from the start of Trevor Lawrence's career, it's not looking too hot right now.
Moving on to our matchups. But before we get into the matchups, we've got a studs and duds section inspired by Brian Tambo, our fantasy foreseer. So Brian, I did switch our points to half PPR since that's how most leagues are played. So I did just a few stats, but lead us off with our studs of the week.
Our studs of the week at QB. There was some good ones here. I mean, and they're big names for your fantasy quarterbacks out there. Justin Herbert balled out. He beat the Chiefs this week with 30.8 points. Josh Allen balled out with 5 touchdowns. He had 37 points. Stafford, again, beat the Bucks, the reigning champions. He even had 29 points. So it was a big week for some of the QBs out there that a lot of you people have drafted. On the flip side, the running backs, we had Najee Harris absolutely balled out. I think he had 19 targets, which is the most by an NFL running back. I think it was all time, actually. He had 14 catches. He didn't score, which is the only problem, but he had 21 points in a half PPR league. So all those Najee Harris owners out there, you should be feeling pretty good about that. Nick Chubb took a backseat to Kareem Hunt this week. And I think Nick Chubb only had like 8.5 points, and Kareem Hunt ran for a huge touchdown. He had 23.5. The one that hurts the most is Zeke. Zeke scored 2 touchdowns last night. He looked pretty good. I don't expect Zeke to do a lot in the upcoming weeks because Tony Pollard still gets a lot of usages in the offense. I think it was just game scripted from the 1 yard line. I think he got 2 1-yard touchdowns or actually got 1 1-yard touchdown, and another that was like 5 yards away. So I think of that more as luck, but again, you could say what you want about Zeke. And then James Robinson finally had a good game. I think he had 88 yards, a touchdown. He was actually a pretty big focal point of the passing offense too, which is good to see for all those James Robinson owners. And he had 22 points. And then on to the wide receivers, Mike Williams. That man is he's the best thing.
He's lighting it up this year.
He is lighting it up. He is so good. He had 29.7 points this week, 7 catches, 122 yards, and 2 touchdowns. No shock to seeing Cooper Kupp up here again. I wanted to draft him in one of my leagues, and I couldn't get him in any of them. I knew he was going to ball out this year with Stafford because he loves his slot guys. But Cooper Kupp had 26 points, and Justin Jefferson also balled out as well, and he had 22.3 points. So those are some big studs there. On to the tight ends.
Do you want me to take this?
Yeah, I was like, I'm just gonna keep going. Screw it.
Yeah.
Going on to the tight ends. Dalton Schultz, which was surprising because I wish it was Blake Jarwin, and he was my guy last year.
Like, what could have been anytime Dalton Schultz catches the ball, I'm like, this should be Blake Jarwin.
Dalton Schultz had 2 touchdowns last night, 23 points. Like, it could have been Blake Jarwin, but if he never got hurt, maybe Dalton Schultz wouldn't even exist right now. It is what it is. He had a great game. I'm not expecting him to do this every week. We move on. Tyler Conklin, your waiver wire tight end of the week. He had 16.5. He actually looked really, really good against the Seahawks defense. And the Seahawks defense did look pretty good in weeks 1 and 2. So it comes to surprise that he has such a good game. Again, I don't expect him to have these weeks week after week, but if you're looking for someone in your depth chart tight end, Conklin could be the guy. And then Mike Gesicki, finally, he had a dud in week 1, and he had 12 targets last week with Jacoby Brissett. So as a Mike Gesicki owner, because I didn't draft a tight end and I should have took TJ Hawkinson, that's my fault. But it's good. It's good and promising that with Jacoby Brissett, he likes Mike Gesicki. So stay strong with him, because I think the targets will keep on rolling as long as Tua's out. And then moving on to kickers and defense, some of the main ones were Chase McLaughlin, Justin Tucker, obviously, with the 66-yard field goal, Mason Crosby for the Packers. And then defenses were in order from Arizona, Saints, and Denver with 21, 20, and 19. And those are the studs for the week.
It's just, if you had any combination of that, you could easily add 40 points from your special teams. Like, imagine going into your lineup, you're like, man, I had a really good week, but I lost because my opponent's kicker and defense combined for 40 points.
That's tough. I mean, I had Denver's defense in all 3 of my leagues, and that was a big factor into my 3-0 week. So it goes a long way, but people, you have to draft your kickers and defenses strategically, because they are a big part in your fantasy week.
Speaking of some low levels of the week, some duds, you had a set of 5 duds. So I've got a set of 5 duds afterwards, but you want to lead off with yours?
Yeah, my first dud of the week was DeAndre Hopkins. For whatever reason, the Cardinals offense did not show up, even though they won the game. It seemed like they probably should have lost it. Jacksonville returned a 109-yard kick return, or I guess a kick 6 is what they call it.
Okay.
I think Matt Prater tried to attempt a 68,
which is
68-yard field goal, and they returned it for 109 yards. So the Cardinals are down at halftime to the Jaguars, and then James Conner was like, hey, I'm still a good running back, and they ended up winning the game 31-19. But DeAndre Hopkins was nowhere to be found. He only had 3 catches. Tyler Lockett, disappointing week for the Tyler Lockett owners, but we knew this was going to happen. He has his weeks. He has good weeks. He has his bad weeks. He only had 4 catches. TJ Hawkinson, pretty sad that he only got 2 catches, but I'm not too worried about him. He's still a stud in that offense. It is what it is. He wasn't used that much because Baltimore is pretty good against tight ends, so we'll let that one slide. Allen Robinson, he's starting to scare a lot of fantasy owners. I'm kind of glad I didn't draft him in any leagues. And it looks like the A-Rob days are going to be over pretty quickly, because even if Justin Fields does be the starting quarterback, he runs the ball too much. Dave Montgomery still gets his carries. I just don't see A-Rob having a great season, honestly, and that's why he's on the dud list. And then Robert Woods taking a backseat to Cooper Kupp, only 3 catches. Everyone thought this was going to be his breakout week, and it just didn't happen. I mean, I'm expecting Robert Woods to only go up from here, but right now it's kind of a little concerning to be a Robert Woods owner.
It's like the first 3 guys you mentioned, DeAndre Hopkins dealing with an injury, so not surprised he had a low game. Tyler Lockett, super inconsistent, also dealing with a few nagging injuries. TJ Hawkinson was just blocking for some reason this game. It was like the Lions were up by enough where they didn't need TJ Hawkinson, but I don't think that's going to be the case going year round. The 2 concerns are Allen Robinson, because with Justin Fields, he does not look good. Justin Fields looks lost, which basically affects Allen Robinson's performance. He was basically just be Allen Robinson's a PPR guy who just gets a lot of catches with the super inconsistency, more inconsistent quarterback play than he's used to. He's on thin ice right now. And then Robert Woods has progressively been worse and worse each week. Everyone's just trying to figure out what's going on. Clearly, Matthew Stafford loves Cooper Kupp. And then you just got a mix of Deshaun Jackson, Van Jefferson, and Robert Woods are all just kind of getting what is left over in this offense. And it's just Robert Woods was never a big play guy. He's always basically a super consistent floor man, but his floor is a lot lower right now unless we see a change in the offense going forward.
Definitely.
So my duds. So I got to start off with Tyson Williams. Going into this game with Detroit, it's like, he should run all over Detroit. This giant heavy rushing game, finished with 5 rushes for 22 yards. So he's averaging over 4 yards per carry, which is great. They just need to give him the ball more and stop giving it to Freeman and Murray. A.J. Brown had a rush for 3 yards and was out. Noah Fant, 2 catches for 15 yards. Didn't really need to be used in the game where they were playing the Jets. Robert Tonyan, 1 catch, 6 yards. Almost got into the end zone, but that was it. And then the Steelers defense, 2 points versus the Bengals, a team that had 3 interceptions last week. They just got run over by a Cincinnati team that no one was expecting this outcome.
Yeah, I mean, the football team definitely had the worst defense with -4 against the Bills because they absolutely got smoked. But the Steelers are one of the top defenses, and we're one of the top defenses drafted in fantasy football drafts. So it's pretty disappointing to see that.
All right, Brian, would you drop the Steelers defense?
No, because they have a lot of injuries on defense, and I think that when TJ Watt's fully healthy, they're a force to be reckoned with. And when they do have home games, that's really where their defense shines. But for now, I'd keep them. I might not start them, but I would keep them on the bench just in case because they probably will end up turning around at some point.
They have the hardest schedule in the NFL. So let me read you the matchups that if you're going to hold the Steelers defense, this is what you're going to have to be dealing with in the upcoming weeks. And it's not pretty. It's not like, oh, they're playing run-of-the-mill offenses. They're playing some top offenses, and they really don't catch a break until they play Chicago. So they've got Green Bay this week. And then maybe you got a decent matchup versus Denver. Then you play Seattle. Then you have a bye, and then you have Cleveland. And then, okay, maybe you get Chicago week 9, Detroit week 10. Then you finish the season with the Chargers, the Bengals again, the Ravens, Minnesota, Tennessee, Kansas City, and then Cleveland again.
Yeah. Okay, I'm starting to think again. Yeah, probably they probably end up on the waiver wire at some point.
So it's like if you are holding on to the Steelers, you're holding on to them for week 9 and week 10, and then that's it. So that's a giant clog to your roster. And honestly, I'm a Steelers defense owner. I'm probably going to drop them just because why hold on to a defense that you're not going to play for 5 weeks when there's better streaming options available?
And defenses they always fluctuate every season too. Like Steelers were so good last year. We thought the Washington football team was so good last year. They're not really showing it this year on defense. So it's not really surprising to drop the Steelers defense, and especially with how hard their schedule is, they probably should deserve on the waiver wire considering the teams that they are playing.
And without TJ Watt, it's just even like they lose that presence, getting those sacks, getting those stops on defense. And like, even though the Steelers are still good as a defense in the NFL for fantasy, they could get lit up at any moment with the next few weeks.
Sure. So for sure.
For example, I would much rather play the Titans versus the Jets over the Steelers this week. I'd much rather play the Washington football team versus the Falcons. I'd much rather play the Bengals versus the Jaguars instead of the Steelers versus the Packers.
I'd rather play the Marlboro High School football defensive team against the Jets, because the Jets are just absolutely terrible. You start any defense against the Jets, you are getting over 8 points. I promise you that 100%.
All right, let's get into our matchups before this gets a little too tangenty. So we got the Washington football team versus the Falcons, over under 48 points, an even line from Vegas. So here's what you got to know about the Falcons is that they look like they've been lost all year. Narrow victory over the Giants for their first win. The Giants' game plan to take away Kyle Pitts, which is interesting. Cordell Patterson was their leading wide receiver. You know, their backup running back was their leading wide receiver. Matt Ryan had a QBR of 50. And going forward, you still have to play Calvin Ridley for the upside in his talent. You still have to play Kyle Pitts because where you took him is basically way too high for a tight end, and you're kind of stuck playing him week to week. Now, both of them have a lot of talent, so there is upside, but if they get game planned away, then you're going to be left there scratching your head. On the Washington football team, Heineke is going off. He keeps the offense going. Could be a bounce-back game for Terry McLaurin, who only saw 8 points last week. Antonio Gibson should find more yards on the ground versus porous Atlanta defense. This week, it's just a defense is going to turn it around. Everyone should still dominate. Gibson, McLaurin, and Logan are going to be decent plays. One situation that you could be aware of is that a negative game script for the Falcons could mean more Patterson over all of their other potential weapons on the team, which means Mike Davis could also have another bad week going forward.
I'm expecting big things out of Antonio Gibson. Again, we hyped him up so much that the touchdowns are going to come. And I think that the football team should end up winning this game because the Falcons had a fluke game last week. They barely won, but they pulled out a win, and I don't expect them to win this week. So give me the football team, give me Antonio Gibson, 2 touchdowns, and we'll see what happens.
2 touchdowns, 100 yards for Mr. Gibson Brown.
All day, 7 catches. Moving on to the next game, Texans versus the Bills. I think we saw what's the potential of the Bills over here. So Josh Allen last week, he had 5 touchdowns. He had, I think it was 34 for 36 passing for 390 yards, and then 4 passing touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown, which is just absolutely insane. Reason why he was the fantasy MVP last year. And again, he's back on track to win league MVP and potentially fantasy MVP again. But the amazing stat is that the Bills have outscored their opponents 72-14 in the last 2 weeks, which is just absolutely insane. Every single Bills player in this matchup gets a plus. Zach Moss showed up last week, Devin Singletary the week before that. So the running backs are looking a little bit better as the weeks go on. It looks like everyone in this offense is getting a little bit of the fantasy love.
Except for Devin
and on the
Singletary.
flip side for the Texans, except for Devin Singletary. On the Texans side, though, the only valuable player on that team is Brandon Cooks. He is the wide receiver 6 on the year. I believe that's right. And he keeps getting targets. He is matchup proof. Mills is targeting him a lot last week. I mean, I expect big things out of Brandon Cooks moving forward. Again, the only person you'd ever start on a Texans offense is Brandon Cooks. However, the Texans are not as good as the Bills. The Bills, again, have outscored their opponents 72-14 in the last 2 weeks. So I expect the Bills to probably win this game pretty heavily and win another game this week.
So as a defensive coordinator, how do you just not double cover Brandon Cooks every single play? Like, you know he's the only option. You know it's where they're going to go. Just double cover him every single play if you want to leave the game with a shutout.
I would think that would be the smart idea, but Brandon Cooks is pretty good. He's shifty out there. He runs good routes, so I think it's more that he's a good receiver rather than that. I mean, I think he's getting double covered some plays, but he's just getting open. He's caught 1,000 yards in almost every single season has been in the NFL. So we got to start appreciating the most underrated fantasy football player out there in Brandon Cooks, because that man can ball.
That man has some crazy stats, but it's just like no one wants him for some reason. Like, why can't a good head coach like see this and just make the trade and get him off this team that he's just doomed on?
I want to start him in one of my leagues, but I'm not going to bench Amari Cooper, where I know Amari Cooper is probably going to do worse than Brandon Cooks. I cannot physically have myself bench Amari Cooper for Brandon Cooks for whatever reason it may be.
It's a mental block. But getting on to Colts versus Dolphins. So the score of this game is going to be 43.5, with the Miami being a 1.5 point favorite. This is going to be a hard game to watch for fantasy fans. This is going to be a hard game to watch for NFL fans. Carson Wentz is not that guy. Had a QBR of 38. The entire team struggled versus a bad Titans defense. I don't have faith in any of their players. If you drafted Jonathan Taylor, you're stuck starting Jonathan Taylor. Outside of that, if with the way Carson Wentz is playing, don't have Michael Pittman in your lineup. He's a flex play at best. And there's really just nothing else on the Colts going on at the moment. For the Dolphins, Jacoby Brissett has shown that he's capable of keeping this offense alive and almost might be better for some of the fantasy weapons. As we've mentioned, Mike Gesicki had 12 targets. Jalen Waddle had 13 targets. They were both great PPR plays this week. We didn't see it from Will Fuller in his first game back. Maybe something turns around. And this week, Devontae Parker he is gone. I have no idea where he is. Gaskins continues to be pedestrian, not having big games, not having terrible games. Very RB2 levels at the moment. Situation they should be aware of is that the Dolphins defense will probably shut down most of the upside of the Colts offense. Jonathan Taylor is going to be seeing a lot of sack boxes this week.
If only people listen to our fantasy podcast and knew not to draft Jonathan Taylor, you wouldn't be stuck with him right now. That's it. But moving on, we have the Browns versus the Vikings. The Vikings, they came off a pretty big win last week against the Seattle Seahawks. And I know Berkey's crying over there because
before you get into your breakdown, I've totally accepted that we have a terrible defense. It's very much if the offense stutters, then the game's going to be lost. It feels like the one-man band season back in 2017 when Russell Wilson had to do everything. Even though they did have a good defense, there was no offense. Now it feels like it's the opposite, where they have a good offense where they could score a lot of points, but if they don't, the defense is not going to be stopping anyone this year.
No, it's a great point. Good excuses to make up for the atrocious game that they just played without Dalvin Cook. Anyways, moving forward, Madison, he actually looked really good. He had 112 rushing yards, I think was 1 yard behind Derrick Henry for being the league leader in rushing for week 3, which is pretty surprising to see because every time Dalvin Cook's gone down, Madison always hasn't really performed to his expectations of that RB1, RB2 that people wish he was. But people who started him this week when Dalvin Cook went down should be pretty happy with themselves because he had a great game. Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen honestly can arguably both be wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2s in fantasy because their production is so high. Kirk Cousins loves throwing to both of them. I think they're both going to be on and off. Justin Jefferson more of the middle of the work guy, catching all the passes, while Thielen catches more of the touchdowns. So they're good 1-2 punch, one of the better wide receiver duos out there. And I expect them to probably do that against the Browns this week as well. The flip side, the Browns, Nick Chubb took a backseat last week to Kareem Hunt. We already talked about it in our studs and duds. I expect Chubb to bounce back this week, and I'm not looking forward to it because I'm playing him in all 3 of my leagues. He probably will get like 2 touchdowns, probably will run for like a 70-yard touchdown, so I wouldn't be too worried on that point. OBJ came back from an injury too. OBJ actually looked pretty good. They don't really have any receivers right now. Austin Hooper, who was my waiver wire tight end last week, did catch a touchdown, so I told you so. Jarvis Landry's still on the IR, so I expect OBJ to probably see a lot of targets in this matchup against the Vikings. That could be pretty high scoring. And then Myles Garrett is indeed a force. I think he had 4 sacks last week. I'm not too sure on it. It was like 4 sacks, like 7 tackles. He had a great game. The Browns defense is looking pretty good right now. So this game's going to be a close one. However, the Browns defense is a lot better than the Seahawks, and I don't see the Vikings, running and throwing all over them like they were against the Seahawks. So I expect the Browns to win this game, but for fantasy players, you never know. Justin Jefferson, Thielen, Madison can all ball out too.
Through the past 2 weeks, Kirk Cousins has been the QB6.
Kirk Cousins is good. Don't sleep on him. I mean, I'm a Kirk Cousins fan. I had Adam Thielen last year. I had Justin Jefferson this year. It's just painful to watch when he gets sacked for like 3 drives in a row, and then you're like, okay, why do I have these guys? Kirk Cousins sucks, and then he throws like a 70-yard touchdown. You're like, okay, that's why. Kirk Cousins isn't that bad.
So moving on to the Titans versus the Jets, I feel like we've covered this enough just by talking about the Titans defense and the Jets offense right now. But real quick overview: 46 over under. Tennessee's favored by 7.5. The Titans, Derrick Henry is going to do what he's been doing the past 2 weeks. He's going to run all over the Jets defense. A.J. Brown is down, so Julio Jones is now the number 1 wide receiver. Julio Jones has not lost a step as he's shown the past few weeks. But because the Jets are so bad that they might not even have to pass the ball. So if you're playing Ryan Tannehill, you're hoping that he gets an early passing touchdown and maybe he vultures a rushing touchdown from Derrick Henry. Otherwise than that, it looks like a good matchup on paper, but you could be disappointed with the Titans fantasy-wise. On the flip side, the Jets, it's been a rough year. Probably won't get any better this week, but this will be maybe the 1 week where Corey Davis has a good game again. It could be a revenge game for Corey Davis. There's very little things to do with the Jets' other players. Michael Carter could be a very long shot play in a flex or RB2 if you're super desperate just because he's leading the room. The Titans aren't going to stuff the Jets as the other teams up. Maybe Michael Carter gets you a mixed bag of catches and rushes and ends with 8 to 10 points on a high note. The one situation to be aware of is that could be a good game on paper for the Titans, but you could be walking away disappointed, like every team that has played the Jets so far has, because they've gone up so early on the Jets that there's been no need for fantasy points in these games.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think Derrick Henry probably has a great game, but you might be disappointed in some of the receivers. Courtland Sutton and Noah Fant got shut down. Not really shut down. It was more game scripted, if anything. So I expect Derrick Henry to have a big game. Corey Davis probably is a pretty big sleeper this week just because it's a revenge game. But ultimately, Titans to win 70 to 7.
Pretty much.
Moving on. Chiefs versus the Eagles. The over-under is at 55, and the Chiefs are projected to win by 6. The Chiefs have lost 2 straight. I've already brought it up a couple times. It is definitely getting a little concerning. Their defense is continuing to lose them games. It wasn't a Clyde fumble this week. It was just the turnovers on offense, and the defense continuing to let up 30-plus points. Things are heading south for the Chiefs, but I think they're going to turn it around. They're still a Super Bowl team. Probably will end up in the Super Bowl again this year. So I'm not too worried about that. Kelsey, Hill, and Mahomes also, they didn't have amazing games. They had okay games, but not amazing. If they want to start winning games, they got to start utilizing them a little bit more. Stop giving Clyde the ball, because when Clyde does well, apparently the Chiefs, it doesn't equal the Chiefs winning games. So maybe they have to go back to their basics and start passing the ball a little bit more.
Maybe it was Mahomes throwing 2-3 interceptions this week.
Yeah, those weren't his fault though. Those are right through receiver's hand. 2 of them were through receiver's hands, and the third one, actually, I don't think he only threw 2, and they both were through receiver's hands. So I'm not going to blame him on Mahomes. He's fine. He's MVP, arguably the best player in football. So Chiefs will be okay. Flip side, the Eagles. I wrote something for the Eagles before last night, and it was a little concerning to watch them play against the Cowboys at home. Jalen Hurts is definitely not prime time material, but he's a fantasy beast. He's still, even though the Eagles got smoked, Jalen Hurts still had 21 fantasy points, which just shows that could be a top 5 QB this year in fantasy. He can run the ball, he can pass the ball. But on the flip side, their defense didn't look that great. They got ran all over by Zeke and Tony Pollard. So it wasn't a great game for the Eagles overall, but I expect them to score a lot of points against the Chiefs, who let up so many points week after week after week because their defense is atrocious. But ultimately, the Chiefs have lost their last 2. I don't expect them to lose 3 straight. So expect a high-scoring game, a lot of good fantasy output for all your Chiefs players, all your Eagles players, but Chiefs should come out on top this week.
Are you worried about the Eagles off? Like, outside of Jalen Hurts, do you think that the Eagles offense is going to stutter? Like, another bad game for Miles Sanders potentially, maybe another letdown for Devonta Smith, or do you think the other weapons turn it around this week?
Well, I think Devonta Smith will turn it around. I think week 2, he just had a lot of drop passes. Week 3, Trayvon Diggs, we found that he's actually a pretty good cornerback, could be like a top 5 corner. He looked really, really good, shut him down all day, had a pick 6 last night. So I expect him to turn around. Rager is really not that bad. Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz, it's kind of tough to choose between the both of them because they do look pretty similar right now. And Miles Sanders, I was never high on him anyway, so I don't really care what Miles Sanders does.
Fair. Moving on. So I actually broke out today my brand new DK Metcalf shirt just because I wanted to add to my collection, because the only 2 shirts I had were Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas, who we both know are no longer with the Seahawks. So I had to update my wardrobe, but nice. As a Seahawks fan, I'm disappointed with the way the team is playing right now, but I can accept the reality of the situation. We're playing the 49ers this week, and I think on paper it's one of those games where it's like it's either going to be high scoring or it's going to be very low scoring, but it's going to be a game where it's going to come down to the wire with the way these 2 teams always play each other. Over-under is 52.5 points, with San Francisco being favored right now. They keep Jimmy G at quarterback. I don't know about that. If they start, I'd be a lot more scared if they were playing Trey Lance with the way the offense could look if you had Trey Lance. But the Seattle Seahawks, let me just start off as the team is in shambles. Coming off a bad loss to the Titans, got embarrassed by the Vikings. DK Metcalf finally had a good game, 107 and a touchdown. Tyler Lockett had a quiet game, got injured, and then tried to fight through the injury coming back onto the field. Chris RB2 Carson is continuing his role of being the perfect RB2 with 80 yards and a touchdown. And I think with the way the 49ers secondary is right now, it should be another high-scoring game for Seattle through the air. On the flip side, the 49ers, just start Trey Lance. Like, please start Trey Lance. He would be much better for the offense with all the motion that's going on. I think that if you're a Brandon Ayuk owner, you can finally have a sigh of relief after the first 2 weeks, but you probably should still wait and see before starting him with confidence. He could be a flex play this week, but I'd still kind of want to wait and see what happens it's before I plug him in as a wide receiver too, because the 49ers have shown that they don't care who you think is going to be the best player. It's going to be completely random until the game starts. Last week, George Kittle had a good game. Deebo Samuel still the only wide receiver I'd play with confidence. And at running back, it's still a giant question mark. Trey Sermon got saved by a touchdown he had, finishing with 10 points, but We saw that one driver, Juszczyk, was the feature running back and ended with a receiving touchdown. So with Elijah Mitchell now being one more week removed from injury, Trey Sermon not having not the best start, but still having a decent night, it's almost just like we still don't know who's going to be the 49ers running back going forward. Jeff Wilson is supposed to come back in 3 weeks too. So it's just a backfield right now that's just like there's 9 guys and no one's happy to play any of them right now. So my situation, just kind of be aware of, is that the 49ers continue to mess with fantasy managers, but Seattle is historically bad versus the tight end. So it could be another big week for George Kittle. But right now they're bad versus everything. So you're playing Deebo Samuel with confidence, you're playing George Kittle with confidence, and then Brandon Ayuk is a flex play at the moment.
Yeah, I think that Tyler Lockett definitely bounces back this week, and I agree with all the points that you said. I think it'll be a higher scoring game versus a lower scoring game, and I think it will come down to the wire. With the Seahawks loss to the Vikings, it doesn't put a lot of trust in me for them to win this week, but you can never count out Russell Wilson because he wins games that he shouldn't sometimes. So it's going to be a good game, and I expect a lot of points from both sides of the ball. Moving on, we have the Ravens versus the Broncos. The 3-0 Broncos versus the 2-1 Ravens. Right now, the Broncos are actually favored by 1 point to beat the Ravens. The Ravens have been killed by injuries all season. Lamar Jackson's been doing everything he can to win football games. He's doing literally it all. He's running, he's passing. If only Marquise Brown could actually catch his touchdowns, he'd be a lot better in fantasy season. But for the Ravens running back room, again, we talked about Tyson Williams. He had a pretty bad week because they like to use Latavius Murray, Tyson Williams, and Devonta Freeman on Lamar Jackson also running the ball like 6 to 10 times a game. So it's a pretty tricky backfield right now. It's a pretty tough position to be in because if they can't produce against the Detroit Lions, they probably can't produce against decent Denver Broncos
Very good run defense.
Or even any other defenses. If you can't produce against the Lions, then you can't produce against anyone. On the flip side, I mean, also, Dave Montgomery's playing the Lions this week, so we're going to probably see him ball out, and everyone's going to be like, oh, my God, I can't believe I drafted Dave Montgomery. Anyways, whatever, side point. But on the flip side, the Broncos, they are on a roll. They're 3-0 right now. They have had really, really easy matchups, so it looks good that they're 3-0, but this game could be a little bit of a test for them because the Ravens' offense is a lot better than the teams that they've already played. But Javonte Williams, I like what I see out of him. He's been playing really well, but Melvin Gordon has also been playing really well too, which is pretty curious to see. So they're one of the better backfield duos in the NFL right now, and I truly believe that because I think Javonte Williams has a lot of talent, but he'll never get the full workload as long as Melvin Gordon keeps producing. So I expect a lot of points out of this game, even though both defenses are pretty good. But I think that the Ravens probably end up, ending the Broncos' reign. And they end up losing their first game. And Lamar Jackson probably goes for like 35 fantasy points.
Yeah, it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how this Ravens offense comes up against this Broncos defense. I think that's going to be the biggest factor of who wins this game because right now the Ravens defense hasn't looked super special, but I don't think Teddy Bridgewater is going to carve them up. But I don't think it's going to be hard for the Broncos to move the ball on the Ravens like we would think about the Ravens in years past.
Also, Noah Fant probably could have another tough week this week, considering that T.J. Hawkinson was just shut down by the Ravens. So that's just something to keep in mind. I mean, he could prove us wrong, and he could have a touchdown. He could have a great game. But with T.J. Hawkinson getting shut down by Baltimore's defense, shows that they like to, pressure on the tight end. So that'll be interesting to watch for Week 4.
Now the Sunday night game that everyone's been looking forward to ever since it got put on the lineup. Patriots versus Bucks, and you can chip in here whenever you want to, Brian, because I know this is more of a your team matchup than a my team. So I'm going to talk about the Broncos real quick. Buccaneers. Over-under is 49 points. Tampa Bay favored by 6.5. This could easily be like a total bloodbath, one-sided. Buccaneers. Tom Brady is about to set the all-time passing yards record. He's like 180 yards away. Will most likely torch a defense that he knows inside and out because he's been with this team for 20 years prior. Play all your Buccaneers if you have them. Be ready for one of them to have a bad game. Whichever one draws J.C. Jackson as a matchup could be the one Buccaneer that has the one bad game. Brady's usually going to throw 4+ touchdowns. The injury to Gio could force Leonard Fournette back into the pass-catching role. And all I've got for the Pats is LOL, plain no one. I have an actual thing wrote out, but do you have anything you want to talk about the Pats before I kind of knock them down?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna get blown out this week. It's gonna happen. We're not looking like a great football team right now. We get to the red zone, we just can't score. Our defense is not looking as strong as it was in the years past. It's gonna be sad to watch Tom Brady absolutely crush our hopes and dreams, but as Pats fans, we kind of have to appreciate Brady for all he's done for us in the past years. I mean, 7 Super Bowls is a lot, so it's tough to get mad at that. I know the Seahawks probably could have had 2 Super Bowls, but some man, by the name of Malcolm Butler had to ruin that for you. So 7 versus 1. I mean, again, I'm always going to appreciate Brady, but they are going to absolutely murder us this week.
It's like realistically, you can't play anyone. The Buccaneers defensive front seven is going to eat Mac Jones alive. The only decent plays maybe Jacoby Myers from a PPR standpoint because he'll be the only guy Mac Jones is probably looking at passing the ball. It's not going to be high yardage, even though the Buccaneers secondary is injured. It's just, I think Mac Jones is going to have such a little time to throw the ball. That's going to be like Jacoby Myers, like 15 targets, 8 catches, 70 yards at best. Maybe he finds the end zone. Maybe the defense somehow pins them back in a certain situation where they have good field position for a drive or two, but you got your fingers crossed, hoping for good things from the Patriots on Sunday night.
We're going to see. We're going to hope, but it's going to be nice to watch Brady break that passing yard record because he ultimately deserves it, and he's a GOAT for a reason. So I'm not too upset by losing by 50 to the GOAT and the man that once played for New England. But it is what it is. Moving on. Monday Night Football, Raiders versus the Chargers. This is going to be a really good one. This is going to be a lot of points. Like when I'm saying a lot of points, like every time they play each other, it goes to overtime, and it's always like 35-40 every single time.
Let this be like a 48 to like 48 game just for fantasy managers.
I'm not kidding. I have watched too many Chargers-Raiders games to the point where they are just bloodbaths every single time. There is no defense involved. They just score points every single time. Chargers, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Justin Herbert. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. You should already know by now. If you play fantasy football, you watch football, you just know the core four, the studs on that team are just going to absolutely ball out in this game. Start them all in your offense, or start them all in your lineups with confidence because they're going to do some damage. The Raiders, they are actually the worst 3-0 team in football, and I can truly stand by that, even though the Panthers and Broncos are a tough second right there because whatever reason it is, the Raiders are winning games by just the littlest amounts. They're just airing the ball out. They think they're like the 07 Patriots. So I don't know what's happening with the Raiders right now. Waller, he continues to get a lot of targets. Bryan Edwards is apparently a monster now. I did say Bryan Edwards would be a beast, and he is looking pretty good right now. Ruggs is looking pretty good. The Raiders just have had such a pretty easy schedule. They did have a good win against the Ravens in week 1. So I'll give them credit there. But other than that, they've had some pretty soft matchups in the other 2 weeks. So I expect the Chargers to win this game. They just beat the Chiefs in KC, which is a huge win. Chargers are just better on both sides of the ball, defense and offense. So I expect this to be a shootout, honestly. So if you have Darren Waller, if you have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, Justin Herbert, even Derek Carr, throw them in your lineup. This is going to be probably one of the best games of the year. I'm calling it right now.
And I got to go call 911 real quick because you just put the Steelers in a body bag by calling them a soft matchup.
They are a soft matchup. They are. Now Man. They are, yes.
2 soft matchups. Like, okay, the Ravens. It was like, the Steelers.
The Steelers, they're not it. I mean, let's look at the Steelers last year. Had the easiest schedule in the NFL. Went 11-0 to start the season. They finally started playing some good teams, and what happened? They started losing games. Now they have the hardest schedule in the league. Everyone's like, oh, what happened to the Steelers? It's because they're not that good at football. That's why. Ben Roethlisberger should just retire. They should get a new quarterback, start using Najee Harris, give him the ball 40 times, and start looking for the future because the Steelers, honestly, they are on their downfall.
Yeah, it is. They were on their downfall last year. I feel like somehow, for some reason, Big Ben thought he still had it, as he showed that Big Ben does not have it, which is why Deontay Johnson is the only wide receiver I like because he just peppers him with targets. So when Deontay Johnson comes back and is healthy, I still see Big Ben peppering him with targets. I'm not super high on Juju or Claypool because of that. But we got to get into the games that were left behind by John Rudney. So we can do these real quickly. We can go every other one if you want. So Bengals versus Jaguars, Thursday night, over under 46 points. Bengals favored by 7.5 points. Quick notes, Jags looks abysmal. Bengals just dismantled the Steelers. Could easily be a blowout and crush Jacksonville.
And then the other one, Panthers versus the Cowboys. Cowboys looked pretty good last night. Terrence Marshall and Robbie Anderson, they might absorb some targets just from the CMC loss. Chuba Hubbard's going to be pretty good. DJ Moore's continue to ball out. On the flip side, Trayvon Diggs actually is a legit cornerback. I expect CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper to not be as bad as they were in the last 2 weeks. So I'm thinking big things for this game. It's a 3-0 team versus the heavy Dallas Cowboys offense. So it should be a pretty good one.
Then moving on, Giants versus Saints, over under 43.5 points. New Orleans is favored by 8. Rest in peace to all hopes for the Giants. You're only playing Saquon if you have to play Saquon. Evan Ingram has come back and is taking all of the receptions away from Sterling Shepard, which is kind of, we all saw this coming. You're playing all your Saints because the Giants have been abysmal so far. Saints are going to crush it. Good game from Kamara. We'll see what Jameis Winston does this week.
Yep. Next one is Cardinals versus the Rams. Cardinals offense kind of struggled last week. Jalen Ramsey is going to be on DeAndre Hopkins this week. It sucks to be a DeAndre Hopkins owner because he's going to have another bad week when Ramsey's on him. He could prove us wrong. You never know. But Christian Kirk could be a beast. Rondale Moore could be a beast. Chase Edmonds catch a lot of passes out of the backfield. And then every Rams player. I mean, I think Robert Woods comes back this week. Cooper Kupp, obviously. Van Jefferson, Deshaun Jackson. The whole Rams is just going to absolutely ball it this weekend. It's a pretty weak secondary in the Cardinals. So I think it should be a pretty good one as well.
Then Steelers versus Packers, over under 45.5 points. Green Bay's favored by 7. If the Bengals can win over the Steelers, so can the Packers. So you're going to start Rodgers, you're going to start Aaron Jones, you're going to start Devontae Adams. On the flip side, we did see San Francisco have success versus the Green Bay defense. So you're still going to play Najee, maybe he has a decent role. You're going to just basically play the Steelers wide receiver that you have. Besides, you could probably hold off on playing Juju coming back from injury. Deontay Johnson is hopefully a full go. You just have to be ready for Jaire Alexander to just shadow one and take him out of the game. Hopefully it's Claypool and not Deontay Johnson.
I can see all of that.
Now we got to get to John Rumney's segment, the clown of the week. John Rumney cannot be here, so he cannot name his clown, so he is his own clown this week. But Brian, you got one.
My clown of the week, and I think he was a clown last week too. I can't remember, but Ryan King starting the Washington football team against the Buffalo Bills. I don't know why you'd start a defense against the Buffalo Bills. I don't know why you'd start a defense against the Buccaneers. I don't know why you'd start against the Rams. All the top-powered offense, do not start a defense against them. They had -4 points, and I beat him by, I think, like 40 this week. So maybe if you had a better defense, you only would have lost by 30. But just keep in mind, don't do that going forward.
And my clown is, the hard thing is, I think, with this segment for me is trying to look at people, the players people decided to go with in the context of what we knew before that game. So for me, as you just mentioned, anyone who played the Rams or Bucks defense against the Rams or Bucks offense, even if it's a good defense, if they're going up against a high-powered offense, they're going to get scored on. So it's much better to play a bad defense versus a bad offense versus a good defense versus a good offense.
It should be without saying that, but yes. So get them out of your lineup because there's better waiver wire options.
And that wraps up our episode this week, Brian. I'm glad you could be on for it. I'm still very excited that fantasy football is back, even though we know that some of our teams aren't doing great. It's way too early to start drawing conclusions, but we are at the point where it's almost where you drafted players no longer matters. It's production, it's context, it's matchups, it's what's going to be happening over the next few weeks. So one, don't be trying to get players right now based off of weeks 10 through 16 because you might not be in playoffs. You can't just call your shot already. You should really be focusing on weeks 4 through 9 right now and just trying to basically manufacture wins so your team doesn't sink all the way to the bottom and you look at your team trying to figure out what to do and where you went wrong.
And also bye weeks are coming up too, I think starting on week 5. So you need to make sure that you have good bench players for those guys because those could be the main reason you win or lose weeks. So start thinking about that now because it's going to catch up on you like that.
As always, to end of the podcast, cheers, Bryan.
Cheers.